So I've opened up a pattern. Well, actually, this is a pre-existing pattern, but I've chosen certain parts of the pattern to illustrate key factors that you're going to need to be aware of. So first of all, most shopbot patterns will be printed onto A0 tracing paper, so these can be quite big, so it's really a good idea to make sure that you have enough space to work with them, either clear the floor or use a dining room table, and just make sure you can see the pattern pieces once they've all been laid out. So I'm going to start by just illustrating this numbering. So you'll see on these patterns that there will be the numbering, and they will correspond with the numbering in your instruction leaflet. They'll also have the code, which is very useful when you're working with multiple patterns, because you'll know that this corresponds with this packet. You'll also find underneath the name of the pattern piece, and what variation it corresponds with. And then underneath that, normally in multiple languages, you find cutting instructions, which again you can use just to cross-reference with your pattern instruction to make sure you're cutting it correctly. The other thing you may find in the instructions of a garment are the pattern, they're called balance marks, balance lines. So this is where your bust line will be, this is where the waistline will be, and normally down the bottom here is your hip. So when you are looking at making a garment, you need to kind of imagine that your body's in 4 quadrants. You've got from this point upwards, which is quadrant 1, here to your waist, quadrant 2, here to your hip, quadrant 3, and from your hip down, which is quadrant 4. And these intervals, balance marks, are usually on the pattern, which is very, very useful. And then what you get are a whole variety of different instructions. So I'm going to talk you through those now. So this is a good example here. So when you see a pattern with a line going down it, that line there is called the grain line. And the grain line is supposed to correspond with the lines of the thread on the fabric itself. So fabric that has been woven will have threads going down and threads going across. So they're your warp threads, and this is your weft threads. And the pattern piece should be aligned with those threads using that grain line. So they are very common on pattern pieces. You will see that there are different variations of sizing. Now, on in shop bought patterns, generally speaking, everything's printed in black and white. On digital patterns, sometimes the different sizing, the grading lines, will be in colour. But in order to assist with the cutting, quite often you'll see different types of dotted lines or dashed lines to illustrate different sizes. So it's really worth noting which one corresponds with the size that you're cutting. Another line that you may come across is one that goes down the garment side and points towards the edge. Now, this is called a fold line. So if your pattern piece requires for you to cut the piece against a folded line of the fabric, this will be illustrated using these arrows. And it's really useful when you're cutting out your pattern to put all of those that have this cut on the fold line on them in one pile, and then those who don't on another pile, just so you know that you are placing all of those on a folded line, because there is a limitation to how much space you've got down that line. You will find little triangles. Sometimes they can just be markers, like a single line marker. These are notches. So if you imagine that every garment is constructed a bit like a jigsaw puzzle, different parts will correspond with different pattern pieces. So, and how you make sure that everything's in the right place is by joining the notches up from one pattern piece to another. So they are so important when garment making. It gives you a beautifully accurate finish, and they're particularly useful when you've got a rounded part of the pattern. So for example, this here is your armhole. It's really useful to match that up with the sleeve, so you've got it balanced absolutely perfectly. Sometimes you'll find that notches are singles, and sometimes you'll find that they're doubles. So here we've got a double notch, and normally if there is more than one notch, there is an attributing instruction in the pattern somewhere to take a note of. So for example, on sleeves, if you are looking at the front of the sleeve, normally there's a single notch. If you look at the back of the sleeve, there's normally 2 notches. So if there are more than one notch, there'll be more instructions to follow. You also sometimes get these to illustrate where you might need to put a patch pocket. So these dashed lines aren't to be cut, they're there to be to mark out where you need to sew. You will also notice on patterns quite often little circles all over the place, actually, and these circles again relate to an instruction. So on this example here, you've got small circles and you've got larger circles, and you will notice when you read the pattern that it will refer to a small circle or a large circle or a triangle or a square, depending obviously on the type of designer and their preferences. Now these are markers, but because they're not on the edge of the fabric, it's really hard to use snippers to illustrate where they need to go. So these are where you would use tailor tacks to mark out. So this is a good example. These points here are showing you as a sewer at what point you need to finish the dart, because if you carried on sewing, it will go across your bust point and it won't look correct. So these are all there to illustrate when your dart is to be finished. But as I said, different instructions will relate to different things. So here we've got lengthening and shortening lines. So as I said, most garments are made for women, are made for people who are between 5'4" and 5'6". So if you're taller or shorter than that, then you may need to do some adjustments on these lengthening and shortening lines. Now, the neck to waist measurement, your measurement compared to the garment measurement, needs to be calculated against each other. So if you've got a much smaller neck to waist ratio, you need to look at shortening the pattern against these lines. If you've got a longer one, then you need to split the pattern along those lines and lengthen it. I do go into more detail in a different video about this, but essentially these 2 lines there are the optimum point on this particular pattern piece in which you can lengthen or shorten the garment. And I guess finally, to say that if there are any pattern instructions that aren't familiar to you, or I haven't explained, then please take yourself back to the instruction page where there is a reference guide and a glossary, because all that will be explained in that little section of how to use this pattern. So you're not going to be lost. If you don't understand what these marking means, they will all be explained in that first little section.